to the FIT4Privacy podcast with Punit Bhatia. This is the podcast for those who care about their privacy. Here, your host, Punit Bhatia, has conversations with industry leaders about their perspectives, ideas, and opinions relating to privacy, data protection, and related matters. Be aware that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are not legal advice. Let us get started.
We normally talk about EU GDPR and then we look at GDPR or privacy in function of EU being one entity. But then EU constitutes of 27 member states. Some of them are also referred to as emerging countries. And then we also have a term called emerging Europe for 23 member states, some of them in the EU and some of them outside EU. That's what is commonly referred as emerging Europe. How is privacy perceived, implemented in emerging Europe? For that, we're going to talk to the founder of Emerging Europe company, Andrew Wrobel, who's also my dear friend. And we will also ask him how did he implement privacy in his company, that is Emerging Europe. Let's go and talk. So here we are with Andrew Wrobel. Welcome, Andrew.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
It's a pleasure to have you. So tell me, when you think of the GDPR, the EU GDPR, what's the one word that comes to your mind?
Well, I think I would use the word empowerment, maybe giving back power to some extent, because over the last few decades we've been deprived to some extent of being able to use our privacy the way we would like to, and I think that to some extent we have regained that power recently.
Absolutely, GDPR does help empower the citizens and also help them regain the power. And it also helps organizations to an extent to know what to do, what not to do. Because if you don't have the rules, then essentially we are saying, well, I maybe don't need to do anything or I will do my own stuff. So it does set the common minimum standard and empower both individuals and organizations. And in your work in the emerging Europe, what is the interaction or correlation with privacy, especially?
Well, I think there's quite a few different areas. We have recently recovered from COVID to some extent. Of course, we have that virus still around, but to some extent, we have recovered, and we have seen how health issues have been important, and also innovation in healthcare. And one of those areas which I find particularly interesting is our medical data and how they can be utilized to increase innovation in healthcare. And I can see that there's quite a few different issues here, because we could. There's actually one person within our network based in Poland who says that we should be able to donate our medical data to, just like we are able to donate blood or marrow, for example, in order to increase innovation in healthcare. And on I think the whole issue of anonymization in medical data, that's something quite interesting, especially for me recently, because you have regulations just like the GDPR scheme, and then you have national regulations that are not always compliant with with GDPR. And for example, this is one of my recent conversations with someone from Poland who told me that uh, for example, several clauses in Patients Act in Poland are not necessarily consistent with the definition of anonymization, which is stipulated in GDPR. So I think there's quite a few different issues, and we could be looking at innovation here. We could be looking at our personal situation, our personal data related to our ID. So I think there's a wide range of topics here.
Absolutely, there are a wide range of topics indeed. But before we get into classifying or understanding how do the emerging Europe sees it, can you help us understand when you say emerging Europe, what are we meaning?
Yeah.
How do we differentiate geographically or regionally that scope?
So our organization looks at Eastern Europe specifically, and defines emerging Europe as 23 countries of Eastern Europe, from Estonia all the way in the north to Slovenia somewhere in the southwest. And then, the whole of Eastern Europe, like Ukraine, Belarus, and Moldova, and Albania, but also South Caucasus. So when it comes to privacy and data and GDPR, the thing is that a lot of these countries already work or are somehow associated with the European Union, which means that companies, whether if they want to work with companies in the European Union, they clearly have to be compliant with GDPR. So I think I'm not sure there is too much of a difference in general if we look at the region, because, well, they have had to be compliant with that. And on top of that, you obviously have certain association agreements with the EU, or most recently, two countries, Moldova and Ukraine, have become official, candidate countries to the European Union. So they also have to strengthen all the regulations related to privacy and GDPR.
So, from what I understand, some of these emerging Europe countries are in the EU,
Correct.
like the Estonia, the Romania, and so on.
Yeah.
And
11 of them.
oh, yeah, okay, 11 of them. Yeah, you know your numbers by heart. And then there's another set which now means 12 of them now,
Correct.
if I
Yes.
understand, who are not part of the EU. So the EU ones would usually be need to implement the GDPR, or it's legally
Yes.
required. But if I understand your statement, you're also saying that for the other 12 who are not legally required to implement GDPR, have more or less chosen to implement GDPR as a
Yes.
framework or as a choice, so that the ease of business with the EU
Correct.
I mean, ease of business is there.
Yes, yes, that's exactly what happens, because one of the sectors that is particularly important for the entire region, that is IT, and these companies work with buyers from or partners from Europe extensively. The same as with the US or Canada, or you know. Uh, but the rest is actually the EU, so it doesn't matter. But the UK as well. Now we have to say that the UK is not. So they need to be compliant here. They need to
Mhm.
make sure that they have all the boxes ticked here as far as privacy is concerned.
And if I may ask a little bit detailed question, I don't
Sure.
want to go into all the 12 countries and say which country has what, but by and large, do because most of the countries who take GDPR as a standard, what they do is they do save as, but then they start to create their own deviations and own variants, which in essence, it starts with GDPR but ends up with a new version, sometimes degraded and sometimes strengthened, usually the degraded version of GDPR. But here, by and large, what are we looking at?
I would
Almost the
say,
same.
oh yes, the same. I would say the same standards. Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. That's good to know. And when they are implementing this EU GDPR per se as a standard, do you see emerging Europe, especially the countries who are not in the EU, having different challenges in implementation? Or what kind of challenges do you see?
So when we look at the region in general, because we were not specifying or naming individual countries, but I think there have been challenges related to things like GDPR, but also intellectual property rights. Sometimes the view on that is a little bit less orthodox, if that makes sense. So we we feel that there is a wider margin of acceptance of not being compliant with some of the regulations. I'm not saying that it's very common, but depending on the market, it might differ slightly. I have also seen, and then I'm speaking, I'm talking about that based on our experience, that sometimes we, and this is related to personal data. Imagine we organize an event, and we are asked to send the list of participants with contact details. And sometimes obviously we are unable to do that because we cannot share personal data. But there are inquiries like that, sometimes coming from larger organizations or governments, or international institutions, which is quite interesting, I would say.
Yes, it's very interesting. In fact, I like to dig a bit more deep into this aspect because most of the event organization companies have this challenge. In the
Mhm.
past, they would collect data and they would share it with sponsors, partners, third parties, you name it. And now with the GDPR, we have to be a little bit more selective and
Correct.
more. There are many solutions, of course, and many approaches. But how do you manage this? Because as Emerging Europe, you organize a lot of events, and events mean personal data. So
Yes.
how are you handling that situation?
Well, we first of all collect the data only for the use related to the event.
Mhm.
So only for that. And if we always ask all the participants if they wish to be contacted going forward once they have signed up for an event. And definitely not share. We don't share the personal data with third parties, because that's not what we would like to do. But that obviously doesn't mean that we are not asked to do that. And you mentioned sponsors, for example, or partners, and sometimes these inquiries do not come from them. They sometimes come from participants, for example. So they would like to know who has registered for the event, and obviously this is a bit of a stretch.
Yeah, it is a bit of a stretch, but you base it on consent. And one of the concerns people have when we say, let's use the data for the event, and we will ask consent if they agree to share, and those who agree, we would share their data. And there are two challenges. One, always an apprehension on part of organizers or even those who would receive data that we may not receive that data. So does that often happen that nobody gives consent, or generally people are quite gracious or generous in sharing their data?
Well, I would say that we don't tend to actually ask them to share their personal data for third parties purposes.
Okay,
We only, so if there's anything that we would like to communicate to them going forward, we would just say, do you agree or do you consent to receive any specific communications from us, be it related to our future events or our newsletter, for example. Would you like to subscribe for our newsletter? Or if they would like to be informed about products or services.
interesting. So rather than sharing the data, you ask them if they want to receive a newsletter or a
Yes.
product. And in that context of subscribing or consenting for product or newsletter, you then bundle in or information around partners. And if somebody wants to give, then they go directly over there.
Yes. Yes. So
That's a
we
very
try to
clean.
limit we try to limit that data processing uh, to minimum.
Yeah, that's a very clean model because my next question, normally I was thinking in my head, would have been, so if it's based on consent, you share the data, the person withdraws consent, what do you do? In this case, you don't have to do anything, just pull them out
Correct.
of your list for newsletter and or the product description. And if they gave the data to the other party, then they are anyways the controller. So you are having a no role to play. They have to do another unsubscribe with the partner.
A
Okay.
comment here, maybe something interesting. We are to some extent an organization that also runs a publication which means that we are often bombarded with different, you know, communications. Let's put it this way, and they are about, you know, a wide range of different things. Sometimes we are subscribed to or you know, for newsletters or for communications that we have never given any consent to. So you know, it kind of both, you know, works both ways, and sometimes it's a bit frustrating that, you know, you receive communications that you have never agreed to receiving.
Yeah, that can happen, but then you are an organization, and some of the organizational data is so readily available in the UK and the EU as part of the transparency from corporate
Mhm.
perspective. And
And this comes actually from various markets. It doesn't have to be within, you know, emerging Europe, within the emerging Europe region. It might be from the UK. It might be, you know, from other countries within the European Union as well.
mhm. And continuing with your part as a company emerging Europe, when you implemented the GDPR, was it challenging? Because you also have multiple dimensions in your business. You have this, maybe let's first understand what do you do as emerging Europe, so that you can yourself explain the different parts, and then I get into
Sure.
how challenging it has been to implement privacy compliance into those business parts.
Well, before I tell you about emerging Europe, I will just make a quick comment about GDPR because, you know, when we I mean, our organization has been around for almost a decade right now. So when GDPR was introduced, we obviously, the UK was part of the European Union.
Hmm.
Now the situation has slightly changed. Of course, we still are compliant here, and we also, uh, well, the UK regulations are pretty much uh, the same, you would say, as GDPR. Now, when it comes to emerging Europe is a growth hub that looks at three different elements. So the first element is our analysis part or pillar, if you will, and this is our editorial or our um analysis side. So we basically we basically look at the whole region, and we try to explain what is, you know, what happens in the region, and how or why these things are important. The second pillar is our intelligence, or you might call it knowledge as well, or insight. And this is our consultancy services, our reports, our research. Uh, and the third one is communities or connections, or our programs where we connect, you know, the emerging Europe region with other parts of the world, but also, you know, closer here in, you know, countries within Europe. So that's emerging Europe.
That's interesting. And where do the events fit in into the intelligence and insights or communities?
The communities, programs, because this is the connection part. So events is where you actually connect with other people, with other businesses. So that's where events come in.
And essentially, the most personal information you collect is in the events part, I believe.
I would say so, yes.
And
But
when you
also,
have to,
you know, if someone subscribes for the newsletter, then, you know, the editorial part also comes in because you
true,
have personal information shared in that area as well.
yeah,
And you know, our reports, so if you go to our website, you will find a wide range of different reports, and because they are available free of charge, we don't charge for them. We just ask our clients, in this case, or those who are interested in downloading these reports, to leave their personal information in return for being able to download the report free of charge. So that is quite similar to the editorial area.
okay, that's good to know. And when you did this, because you mentioned you've been there for 10 years, but at certain point, I believe there would have been two moments of reflection. One when the GDPR came in, and when the Brexit happened. Of course, would have been lighter on the Brexit side. When the GDPR came, how was it? What was the challenges, and how did you overcome those challenges?
We've always tried to keep personal data, quite restricted. So when we started collecting any data, we knew that this is people's personal information basically. So you need to make sure that they are safe, that the statistics or the contact details are safe. So we started looking at it very carefully from the very beginning. When GDPR came in, we made sure that we were compliant with GDPR and that we collected the information, personal data, the way that was compliant with GDPR. And when Brexit happened, we also had to make sure that uh, we are compliant with the new regulations, and we, for example, had to sign up for the new. We needed to become enlisted in a way in the local or national, I should say, regulations and respond to bodies, the ones that have been assigned to control that.
That makes sense. So you basically, even though uh, you were in early stages, you went through the same cycle for compliance as anyone else would have.
Yeah.
Understand what are the challenges, implement, run a project, and then it's done. And again, when there's Brexit, you do an assessment and find out what the gaps are.
Yes.
That's good to know. And then coming back to the emerging Europe situation, how do you see that evolving in context of data protection? Because we are also seeing in the UK the data protection reform. We believe, or some people, there's talk both ways. It's the old wine in new bottle, so nothing much changing per se, or
Hmm.
some things changing and setting the new trend for future, or also the view that it will degrade the data protection standards in the UK, which and all perspectives are valid, depend on which one you look at. There is food
Hmm.
for thought from all. Do you see a change or a shift in the emerging Europe perspective also, or a more maturity coming up as we move along?
Well, I would say that, and I brought this issue up at the very beginning. I think, the vast majority of countries are looking at the EU as the, trendsetter, so to speak, and see how just to be compliant with the European Union, just to make sure that they are able to trade within the block and so on. But I think, like I said earlier, there are challenges, I would say, identified by individual markets, like this health issue and innovation related to that, because it seems that uh, more could be done already in that area. And because if you look at for example, if you look at personal medical data, um, you know I said that there are people who believe that such data should be um, they should they should be able to donate this information, but they need to donate this information to trusted third parties. But the question is, who this third party would be. Should it be the government? Should it be, a company? Should it be on an EU level? Someone on the EU level. That is not something that is clear at the moment. So I think that there are organizations within emerging Europe that are trying to push this discussion further, because there is clearly need to enhance that, to improve that, and that is something that hasn't happened yet. So I think on the one hand you would see compliance, but on the other hand you would see initiatives trying to go a little bit further.
So more or less, if I understand, the EU legislation would lead and they will more or less
Yes.
follow, but there may be certain specifics in which they would lead, because there are different dynamics and different needs. Now, how can emerging Europe help people? If someone is listening to this podcast, what can how what can you serve them, or why should they interact, engage with the emerging Europe?
Well, Emerging Europe is an organization that helps anyone who is interested in that part of the world or that part of Europe navigate that part of Europe, not navigate the region, which means understanding what actually happens, why. If you are interested in, for example, starting to work with businesses from or with the government within the region, we are happy to help. You know, I just jumped off a call with an American company that is looking for a new location to invest in to set up a delivery center somewhere in Central and Eastern Europe, and we are assisting them in finding the right place to do so. And it obviously relates to a number of different things like talent, like labor regulations, like compliance as well. And we're talking about financial aspect, but also GDPR. So we're reviewing different locations for them to help them understand better which of those locations could be a place where they could open a new delivery center. So that is another element that we are happy to help with.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if you are a journalist, if you are a someone who wants to connect with individuals, with startups, for example, that is also something we can help with because. One of the communities that we run is called Tech Emerging Europe Advocates. So anyone who is a startup founder who wants to, or on the other side of the table, if you have an investor that is looking to invest in startups, for example, we can always help them connect. And over the last 6 months, and we're talking about Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine has dominated some of our activities because we feel that we also need to explain what is actually happening in Ukraine, apart obviously from the war happening there. One of the aspects that we have been particularly focused on is around the IT sector,
Mm-hmm.
which means that we have heard a lot of companies saying that it's a very difficult period for the IT sector in Ukraine. I even heard an opinion that the IT sector is dead in Ukraine, which cannot be further from the truth. In fact, in the next couple of days, we are releasing a report talking about the IT sector in Ukraine, and it clearly shows that over the last 10 years, this year included, the IT sector is constantly growing. So, despite the war, exports is growing and so on. So, there's a lot of work that has to be done to explain what is really happening in the region, and that's our mission here. We are here to educate to some extent those who are interested in this part of the world.
That makes sense, and I think there's a lot of interest or question or the curiosity around Ukraine at the moment. What's happening?
Correct.
How is it happening? What will be the impact? So yes, you're doing a very good job in that context. But you also have what we call a podcast. So tell us something about that.
So I personally am the host of Emerging Europe Talks. This is a series of podcasts that looks at two different topics. So there's a theme which is called success and failure. So Emerging Europe Talks success and failure, where we speak to very successful entrepreneurs from Central and Eastern Europe, and we ask them, or I ask them, how they have succeeded, what they want to, what kind of impact they want to make with their company, but also how all the failures that they have experienced on the way have strengthened their work and their achievements as well. So this is one theme, and the other theme is called Tech Emerging Europe Talks Sustainable Impact, which is actually linked to our Future of Emerging Europe program. On the one hand, we talk about the successful projects, initiatives, companies that have done quite a lot in the region. On the other hand, we try to trigger some sort of debate about the future of the region. So looking at all these aspects of Central and Eastern Europe that needs to be improved for the region to flourish going forward. So, the summer has shown quite significant challenges as far as climate change is concerned. So anything related to sustainability, and that might be related to ESG or sustainable development goals as defined by the United Nations. This is what we talk about on that podcast, but always with a focus on Central and Eastern Europe.
So Emerging Europe Talks, that's the thing.
Correct.
Good. I think we'll put the link in the show notes. So, with that, if based on this conversation, someone says, we want to talk to Andrew in context of emerging Europe, or otherwise, Andrew is a interesting person. So, how can they get in touch with you or your team?
Well, they can always find me on social media, for example, on LinkedIn. I have obviously a profile there, on Twitter as well. They can also email me directly. My email is andrew@emergingeurope.org. So it's a very straightforward one. So happy to help if someone is interested in Central and Eastern Europe.
That's great to hear. And I think it was wonderful to have you. I didn't even realize that we're past the half an hour mark and time flew by, but it was a wonderful conversation. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Fit4Privacy helps you to create a culture of privacy and manage risks by creating, defining, and implementing a privacy strategy that includes delivering scenario-based training for your staff. We also help those who are looking to get certified in CIPPE, CIPM, and CIPT through on-demand courses that help you prepare and practice for certification exam. Want to know more? Visit www.fit4privacy.com. That's www.fit4privacy.com. Thanks for listening. If you liked the show, feel free to share it with a friend and write a review. If you have already done so, thank you so much. And if you did not like the show, don't bother and forget about it. Take care and stay safe. Until next time, goodbye. If you have questions or suggestions, feel free to drop an email at hello@fit4privacy.com. That's hello@FIT4privacy.com.